mysteriously, this ended up in my feed. I don't know. It's like I was, my name is James Kozier. I live in Darlington Township in Beaver County, Western Pennsylvania. And I captured from here the massive fallout from the massive illegal burn off of at least 34 to 38 railroad containers that Norfolk Southern illegally burnt off on the Pennsylvania border with all of the winds blowing into Pennsylvania. There's radar and satellite imagery to back that up, the irrefutable evidence that all of it ended up in and onto Pennsylvanians. But I captured the video of that evidence of them burning off containers on the tracks in Pennsylvania on the 5th of February 2023, and I captured several videos. I captured video the day before as well, on the 4th, of them burning off containers, the 4th, the 5th, and then on the 6th I captured the massive fallout of millions of pounds of carcinogenic industrial chemicals from their massive they did like a illegal cleanup. Everything that was left of all of the containers involved in the derailment, Norfolk Southern, working with the Ohio authorities and federal authorities, they burnt off everything that was left on the site. And they didn't do the proper research that they needed to do because they were trying to keep it so secret, keeping a small circle of people. But there was one expert on hazardous materials. His name is Sil Sagano, the fire chief from the Youngstown Fire Department. The Honorable Sil Sagano, Fire Chief Sagano, went on to Channel 27 Youngstown News on the evening of the 5th of February, the night before they did the massive burn off. And he said that the chemicals were so dangerous. He said that they were deadly. He said that in their state of being particles from being burnt, he said that those are carcinogenic. And he said he had models even that he had with the particulates, an account of particulates, how deadly they were. How we're talking carcinogens, though, is what I'm saying. And he was trying to warn those corporate entities that were doing the illegal burn off, working with our authorities, not to do it. He must have gotten word, and they didn't heed his words. They didn't listen because he was saying that the chemicals, not only were they that dangerous, he said, but that they would have a tendency to collect water molecules and get heavy and then fall. And that's what you see in the videos that I captured on the 6th. You can see those massive smoke, carcinogenic industrial chemical laden smoke clouds. They're dragging on the ground at like 2 to 3 miles per hour through western Pennsylvania, heading east. Thousands of people got dosed with those chemicals, and it was all kept secret. I even captured the media, WTAE, Channel 4 Action News. They were there where I captured the fallout of all those chemicals at the junction of Route 51 and 168. They were there, and they never aired any footage. They never sounded the alarm, as is nobody did. There was a blackout, so as far as nobody said anything. Must have been a directive that Norfolk Southern or the Ohio authorities, I don't know, sent out to all of the media to not give anyone a chance to even tape up their windows and doors to mitigate the contamination, because it ended up being a multi-billion-dollar disaster in western Pennsylvania, and they were just hiding it because it would have cost them so much money. And they positioned everything in East Palestine, but never was there ever a wind that ever blew contamination into East Palestine, or Ohio for that matter. It's all on radar and satellite imagery. There is a history of what I just said, irrefutable evidence to back that up. But they positioned it all in East Palestine, and that's where they reported on everything in safety, and that's where the firemen stood in safety as well, because they were told to not put out the fires when they arrived there on the evening of the 3rd, that Friday, that February 3rd, 2023. So the firemen just stood back to the back of everything, and the wind to their backs as they watched the containers being burnt off illegally. Norfolk Southern had contractors that burnt everything off illegally. Of course, no one said anything, and even to this day, three years later, no one has courage to ever use the word illegal or criminal in context with what was done. Thousands of people in Pennsylvania were contaminated to whatever degree with that cocktail of industrial strength, like carcinogens, chemicals. This really happened. But why I bring this up, why I bring that up in context with this, well, the thing is, I was monitored and I was surveilled, so that I could never get any traction with the videos that I captured. There wasn't, you can't find a report about the massive fallout here in Pennsylvania because everything was covered up. And they wanted to make sure that my videos didn't get any traction. They even screen grabbed them because I put them up on Twitter. Now my Twitter account did stay up for a while, but then they did kill my Twitter account and my TikTok and my YouTube. They did that, but at first they didn't because they wanted to see if I had more footage. As they monitored me, they wanted to see what more I was going to release. But they had the valve closed off on me. I couldn't get anything out to anybody. But being monitored, having my civil liberties stomped upon, I was just trying to help in the beginning. I was just reaching out, asking questions like, is there anything that can be given to, the thousands of people that got exposed to this cocktail of industrial carcinogens? Is there anything that can be done to mitigate what might affect their health, and to stave off, cancer, what have you? Is there anything that can be done? I was asking these questions, even in Norfolk Southern. I was reaching out to everybody. I never could get anyone who would even return, talk to me. And I reached out to everyone, every authority, from local authorities all the way up to the Biden administration and then the Trump administration. I mean, every stop, every link in the chain. And, I never could get anything from everyone. It's like no one will touch the issue. Everyone is afraid, or what? Just so corrupt. I don't know. Whatever. I had the governor's ear, Governor Shapiro. He was hanging on my every word for a while, and I was championing him to do the right thing, to bring the perpetrators to justice, to represent the victims here in Pennsylvania. He was the governor of Pennsylvania, still is. He shouldn't be. For what he's done, he should probably be in jail, along with Governor DeWine, the Ohio governor, who declared the false state of emergency to activate our guard to keep people out from capturing the preparations that were made for the massive burn off on the 6th, because they went in there and put out the fires that they said they could get nowhere near. Because like I said, the firemen were told to not put out the fires, but they were used as props. Every time the media would report on what was going on for 3 days over there in East Palestine, which is where they reported on everything from. Because of the actual derailment and the fires were on the Pennsylvania border, on the outskirts of East Palestine. Not in East Palestine, on the outskirts, east of East Palestine. But, I should go back just for a moment and let I mentioned that I captured the Norfolk Southern burning off containers, railroad containers, there on the tracks in Pennsylvania. I did that both Saturday and Sunday, but Sunday I sent out the videos to every media, outlet that I could think of, everyone. I didn't realize that they were working with those corporations. I was naive to that. I had heard people use, nomenclature. That's the wrong way to say it, but you know how they corporate media. You know, in reference to just what thought was a free and independent press. You know, but the fact, what I understand from what happened with this, the media, they were under the directive of the corporations, because I captured WTAE, Channel 4 Action News, there in the video on the 6th of February. They were there and they never aired the footage. Now, it took me a couple of days to realize that they hadn't done that. Because of the generation I was raised in, we had like 12 or 13 channels growing up. And we depended upon, there was a trust, we trusted the news outlet, the television stations in Pittsburgh and Youngstown to tell us, that there was a hurricane or a tornado, or we didn't have the Weather Channel then. We had local news that would let us know, if there was something wrong. Certainly, this massive contamination, this massive burn off and fallout of all of these carcinogenic industrial chemicals should have been something that they blew the whistle, and would have alerted people, so they could have had a choice to evacuate or to shelter in place, tape up their windows and doors to mitigate the contamination. And I had mentioned that I had reached out to, everyone, authorities and everything. I'm like, is there anything that can be done? Because the manufacturers of the chemicals, I'm like, if there's an accident in a factory, I'm sure that they have protocols that they use. So I'm like, is there anything that can be given to these people? Thousands of people here in PA that were left oblivious to be contaminated. Now, getting back to the preparations, I talked about Governor DeWine. I captured footage on Sunday afternoon. I'm sorry, I have to go into this for a minute. Bear with me on this. There's a reason. You'll know here in a moment. Look, and I'm going to tell you all about it here in just a moment. But the thing is that when I sent that footage out of them burning off containers, railroad containers on the tracks in Pennsylvania, that I captured on the 5th that afternoon, someone from the media must have had told them at the command center where they were managing the illegal burn off in East Palestine. I was told later that even they had sent the cops out to detain me from a local fireman. He told me this. My cousin, he is in the fire department here in Darlington Township, Pennsylvania. He told me that when I was up there capturing that on the 5th of that Sunday afternoon, they had sent out. You see, there was media channels 2 or 21 came out to where I was capturing that. They saw me on this. It's like a Route 51 where it goes over the railroad tracks there in Pennsylvania, where I was capturing that. They sent out the media, and I didn't realize it at the time. I know this sounds so discombobulated. Try to follow me, but this was Sunday afternoon. There was a media that came out there, and they weren't there to capture anything. It was so curious because they didn't have their cameras out or nothing. They were just looking at me. And I said, where's your camera and everything? I said, this camera I've got, it's got a good zoom. I said, it's an amateur camera, but it will work for us. I'll give you the footage. And I went down on the tracks to get another perspective. And when I came up, they were gone. Now, why I say this, you see, because you see that media that came out there the day before, they were in on it. I'm saying all of the media knew that the contamination was going into Pennsylvania, but they all kept it quiet. You can't find one report. If there was a criminal grand jury, which there should be, but if there wasn't, if our local, state, and federal governments weren't so corrupt, they would investigate this properly. We'd find out that there was a directive that went out to all the media, and that they're all complicit in the massive cover-up of this. Thousands of people being left oblivious to be contaminated We don't know what that's going to look like 10, 15 years from now, how those carcinogens are going to, in which way, manifest. And I'm sorry to go off on another tangent, but I'll come back to this point. But 3 years after this has happened, now the Trump administration has given $10 million to research firms that are going to be working in East Palestine, it said, to monitor what types of disease crops up. But I can tell you right now, listen to what I'm telling you, please. All of the contamination blew into Pennsylvania, not Ohio, not East Palestine. So even the Trump administration, they are continuing the nailing down the narrative, the lying narrative of East Palestine, keeping Pennsylvania out of everyone's mouth. The $10 million that has been given, federal money given to research firms that are going to be investigating, monitoring, seeing what kind of disease crops up. Really, this has turned out to be, like a big experiment now. But they'll be watching the people in Pennsylvania secretly. Like that's who they're going to be monitoring. Because the people in East Palestine, they just, if they got a trace of it, because I'll tell you what these evil corporations did. They put chemicals into a stream running through East Palestine and then used these aerators that agitated the water violently and made it like mystified it so that there would be chemical traces in East Palestine. I got the video of that too, by the way. When they evacuated everyone, they did that. They brought in aerators to put it in a stream. The stream doesn't run parallel to where the tracks were. It's a separate stream even. You see, the reason why they did that, and please hear me, is because independent research firms, whatever, that come into East Palestine wouldn't find any trace of the chemicals if they hadn't have done that. You see, they want there to be a trace of the chemicals. You understand? So they can keep the narrative nailing it down East Palestine, where you're not going to find the cancer clusters because it all went in. I'm talking about millions of pounds of contamination went onto Pennsylvania. Like I said, the chemicals had properties by which the particles attracted water molecules and they got heavy. And when that shit disappears off of the radar, it's because it's on the ground. It all fell out. It didn't dissipate up into the atmosphere. It was disposed of, but the disposal is on the ground, in the soil, in the streams, like it did rain twice within a month here in Pennsylvania, where, we got heavy contamination. And both times, you could smell and taste the chemicals. I was symptomatic, for at least a month, severely so for nearly a week. My symptoms from the exposure I got was that I had this like headache. First thing was like kind of headache where you can't move, without pain. I had a burning in my chest. I had a cough. I had fatigue, the kind of fatigue where you have a tough time just getting out of bed. But I had to get out of bed because I had such serious diarrhea from the contamination. Another way that it affected me is that my body was very cold. I'm not talking about like cold from being outside in the cold. It was a different cold. It was down to my core, and it was from the chemicals. So I know that people did get dosed with some shit that is bad. This happened to me personally, so I know. I'm a man of faith. I wasn't afraid. You understand what I'm saying? I've been through a hell of a lot worse in my lifetime without going to the emergency room. I wasn't leaving the house. And the thoughts of getting up and going anywhere, because I was so fatigued, I was so sick, I couldn't have done it anyway. And that's the truth. What I'm saying is true. Now, let me get back to where I was. Hold on a moment. I covered a lot on that circuitous little tangent, didn't I? I just want to interject this too. Governor Shapiro, they were monitoring me. His office was monitoring me. They trampled on my civil liberties as well. They had surveillance technology they used along with the federal government. It really happened. Another thing that was done is that the obfuscation is that my footage was screen grabbed. I was trying to say something, but I went on to something else. My footage that I put up on TikTok immediately, it's all time stamped on cellular video. It was screen grabbed and was reposted onto TikTok, and they used promotion so that it got thousands and thousands of hits. But the heading on it was Darlington, Ohio, which is, I don't know how many it's 100 miles to the west, and that none of the contamination went to the west of the Pennsylvania border. It didn't go into Ohio, but it was just a way to obfuscate. I don't know if Joe Rogan got that footage or if he got the stuff off of my TikTok account, but he never asked my permission, or did he talk to me, about the footage before he then featured it on his podcast. The thing about Joe Rogan is that he only showed one of my videos, my initial reaction. He didn't show the video with WTAE, Channel 4 Action News. That's the one that would have blown everything up. If he would have shown that on his podcast, then it would have forced the Biden administration to go ahead, and they would have had to have opened up, a full case on it. It would have been something, there would have been a criminal grand jury. I'm talking about the Joe Rogan experience. That podcast was the most popular podcast in our nation at that time. Now, that being said, Joe Rogan, he never asked my permission. He showed the footage on his podcast with someone on his podcast who kept saying, they had to do it. He was talking about the burn off, which they never had to do it. Now as soon as I'm going to go back to that point in just a moment. This is extemporaneous. I don't have any points here, to follow. I'm sorry about this. Give me just a moment. But Joe Rogan, you have to ask yourself, why did he do it? Because, why wouldn't he have mention of Pennsylvania and have somebody on his podcast who kept saying, oh, they had to do it. You see, the thing is that they didn't have to do it. Those fires could have been put out that evening when the derailment first happened. There are special firefighting teams at the Pittsburgh or Cleveland airport. That's just 40 minutes away, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland's maybe an hour and a half, if that. The way they'd haul ass to get here, I don't know. It's close. But even the chemical companies that Norfolk Southern was hauling the chemicals for, they have special firefighting teams. And I don't know about the local firefighters here, except that they were told to not put out the fires, and they stood and were used as props for the media to report on it, to make it look like they were trying to put out the fires. That was a lot that I just said right there. You might want to go ahead and rewind, or whatever. Go back and listen to this again, because I know this sounds wild, but everything I've said is absolutely true. That's the thing about it. This is absolutely true, what I'm telling you. I didn't mention this, but I sent a note with the footage that I captured of them burning off containers that Sunday afternoon that I sent out to the media. I sent a note with the footage to each and every one of the news affiliates, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, all of them. Everyone I could think of in the alphabet. I sent the footage out to. And with it, I had this note to accompany it, and that was from someone that was raised on a farm here in western Pennsylvania. Just an average person, just doesn't know. I don't know anything about these railroad cars. But I said, listen, what if these fires, that are burning, these containers, what if they get hot, they're hot, and they empty out, and they suck oxygen into them and then explode? I said, can that happen? Now that was what I said. Can it happen? Could they explode? Well, within 2 hours of my sending out the footage to the media, Governor DeWine declares a false state of emergency. And here's what they came out with a lie. They said there is one container that pressure is building up on. It's not. They said there's a pressure release valve that's not working, and it's building up pressure. And they said they have to go in and let the pressure off. Nobody said anything about burning anything off, like doing anything like that. They said there was one container, and they called it a controlled release. They said this when Governor DeWine declared a false state of emergency. He activated our Army National Guard, actually to keep people like me out of there, so that the preparations that were made for the massive burn off of everything that was left of at least 34 containers of hazardous material, railroad containers. How many millions and millions of pounds of this shit we're talking about? Good Lord. But the preparations, are this. They would have to go in there and put out the fires that they said they could get nowhere near. I mean, they've been reporting on it for 3 days, and it makes it look like they're trying to fight these fires, having the firemen used as props. I'm telling you the truth. When I say that those firemen, each and every one of those firemen that went there to, responded, the first responders, they are acutely aware of where the smoke is going, no matter what kind of fire, especially a chemical fire where you're dealing with carcinogenic industrial chemicals. They knew where the hell all of that we're talking. If you look at the footage from the night of the derailment fires, there is footage. You can see that those, not only can you see how massive the fire is, but you look at the radar. Now, if you look where East Palestine is, and then you look at a map that covers like the whole east, all the way to Pittsburgh, what have you, that you can see the smoke. Now we're talking about carcinogenic carcinogenic chemicals, laden smoke. That's what it is. It's poison. It's carcinogens. You can see it on radar all the way down, in truth, to Aliquippa. Now you look at the distance from East Palestine to Pittsburgh. Aliquippa is like halfway to Pittsburgh. How much of it went further without, having like the evidence that you'd see with the particulates? There might have been other chemicals that went all the way to Pittsburgh. We don't know. Now, if it would have been all black all the way to Pittsburgh, they might have made something of it. You know what I'm saying? I'm just guessing at, because I mean, with even these firemen who knew where the smoke was going, they've got family, they've got friends in Pennsylvania. Man, half of them, I mean, those that responded, the fire departments were, most of them were here in Pennsylvania because it happened on the Pennsylvania border. So even the firemen that knew that their family and their friends were being contaminated, they still kept their mouths shut. You'd ask yourself why they would do that. Do you have the answer? Why would they keep their mouths shut? Well, I was told that they did receive at least $70,000 apiece, the firemen. That was like a radius. You see, they have a radius silencing settlement that they only are basing it on 5 containers, y'all. Just 5 containers. I opted out of everything, and I had to argue with my wife about it. She opted out. We opted out of it. We have no part of any lawsuit, nothing. Okay, I'll come back to this, but I couldn't help but do that because, look, you might hear me use expletives, but you best believe I am a work in Christ. I am a repentant sinner in Jesus' name. I'm a work in Christ, a tiny, tiny, tiny I am. I am a work in Christ. And I couldn't see it any other way except that it was appointed for me to capture, the fallout and everything and to release everything like I did. That this whole matter would be brought out into the open, and You see, everything was, they were trying to hide everything, that they were acting like nothing even happened in Pennsylvania. But Pennsylvania was, in fact, where their disaster is and was. It wasn't Ohio. You see what I'm saying? Look, with everything I've said, anyone could drive to where the derailment occurred, and you'll see that you can throw a stone from the border sign, Ohio Pennsylvania border sign, and you'll hit the derailment site with a rock. It's right there. It's right there. Okay. And then you look at the radar, you look at the satellite imagery, the history, and you see that everything that I've said is true. All of the winds are blowing to the east. All of that contamination blew into Pennsylvania, not Ohio. I'm talking about the whole 3-day event. Even the day that you see the plume, that everyone knows about the plume because it was polarized. They used that, as a really big time, If you think about it, the heat of those fires, it carried all that shit up to whatever height it would go, as the winds were then pushing it all into Pennsylvania. So even that day, the particulates didn't fall out in Ohio. They fell out in Pennsylvania. That whole, whatever was misting, whatever there was from the particulates, from burning the shit, it went up fast and went up with the heat. And the wind then carried it at that altitude over, and then it just fell. It got heavy because it attracted water molecules, the particulates did, and it came down. So the whole event, this whole disaster, is a Pennsylvania disaster that was positioned in East Palestine, Ohio, so that these corporations could save what would be multi-billions of dollars. Because Pennsylvania is rural, but there's a lot of agriculture here too. There would have been a lot of properties that would have the property value even now. What would these properties be worth? You know what I mean? What would it cost to subsidize all of the farmers that either grow things or raise cattle, chicken, hogs, whatever? All of those animals would have had to have been put to death, culled, C-U-L-L-E-D. They would have had to have been destroyed. They shouldn't have gone to market, but they did. And so did everything that they grew, because they didn't stop anybody from growing and harvesting that year. So all of that went to market. That was all it was sent out to consumers. People ingested those chemicals, those carcinogens. They ate the fruits of those carcinogens. They ate it from either the eggs that they bought, the chickens, the hogs, the cattle, the soybean that they grew, everything. I mean, nobody did anything about that. It all went to market, everyone. So you may have how many people got ingested those carcinogens that way. Look, 2 times it rained within a month, and both times I could smell and taste the chemicals just like it was by right there, the derailment off of Taggart Road on the outskirts of East Palestine, whatever. We're talking about a cocktail of carcinogens. Now, the court in northeastern Ohio is carrying what is the silencing settlement that the Senator Doug Mastriano from Pennsylvania, he went over there to East Palestine. And it looked like he was doing something heroic, because he said, it wasn't 1 container, it was 5. So then initially everyone's like, wow, you're great. You're great, Senator Mastriano, telling the truth. But folks, the AP, Associated Press, they reported what Norfolk Southern told them the morning after the derailment, even on the 4th of February 2023. They said that there were 14 tankers of vinyl chloride and 20 other containers that were labeled as carrying hazardous materials. That was 34. Initially, like I said, though, it turned out, I didn't know if I did say this, but The Hill reported this year, not this year, but last year, in 2025, that it was 38 containers of hazardous materials that they illegally burned off. Of course, The Hill didn't say illegal, or either did the AP, but Doug Mastriano is the one that planted with his trusted authority. He used it, abused his authority, helping those corporations, probably to see what they're going to help him, with whatever he wants to do politically, help him with his next campaign or something. I conjecture. But he put that into the court in northeastern Ohio. Why is Ohio carrying this? Because the weight of corruption, is really the Ohio authorities. That's that these corporations would rather work with, those people, over there who have already been really steeped, in corruption. They've contaminated them with the corruption, with the lies, with the criminality. So it's a radius settlement, is what I'm getting at. Doug Mastriano, he set the number in there. He came from here, over here from Pennsylvania, went over there to East Palestine, and said there was some kind of a talk over there, they had officials together, and he came out, it was all staged, and most dummies, if you don't know, I'm saying if I didn't know, I'd be a dummy too. I'm not saying I'm smarter than anyone, I could have been left in the dark. It just so happens that I know, I know what happened. But I'd have been just as dumbed down as everyone else. You think, well, you'd trust that senator from Pennsylvania. How he's from Pennsylvania, he'd have to be telling the truth because he's over there representing PA, constituents in Pennsylvania. But Doug Mastriano, he lied for those corporations. That number 5, that's all they're basing, this on, with their silencing settlements, that they're, their radius settlements. Now the people to the west, half of the people named in their silencing settlements, they're just really being paid to carry the lie of the 5 containers. Or to even say that they got contaminated, because they didn't. It's all a lie. It's done to obfuscate, to redirect, to take attention off of Pennsylvania. I mean, when all of the contamination went into it, in reality, has gone into Pennsylvania. If you have, you use the authorities and make it look like, it's a radius kind of like event. You know what I mean? Pretty disgusting. Oh, I don't know. I know I've been all over the place here. I just wonder if what I said, I don't have to go back to, I'm not sure, but, I talked about them going in there when they had looked at the video that they captured and sent out to the media, and they read my note, and they made up that story. They probably read my note where I said, what if, the containers get empty and then suck oxygen into them and they're hot and they'd explode. They probably read that and said, you know what? If that dummy believes it, probably everybody would. Norfolk Southern probably has experience, and they've done this before in various, derailments across the nation, where they've used local authorities to block off an area and they burnt containers off. You could probably find cancer clusters, by looking at on the radar to see where the winds went after those derailments from wherever it was that they had fires, on the sites of the derailments. You probably could find out that there were people, that ended up getting sick, and suffering and dying from contamination elsewhere. Yeah. But I have to emphasize, that I was monitored, and I had FBI agents that came out to talk to me from the Biden administration. They indicated that they had seen the Joe Rogan um, piece. But, on the Joe Rogan piece, where Joe Rogan shows my footage without ever asking me about it or asking my permission, they don't mention Pennsylvania. I did hear after the Biden administration had seen my footage, I presume they came out, the EPA, I'm saying, his administration came out and they said, we hear you in Darlington Township. We hear you, we see you. He was talking to me. I captured the video and, whoever else they would think was with me. I'm alone, Nobody, even in this town, they're all so cowardice. All I'm seeing is an epidemic of that kind of phenomena where people turtle up. They're afraid to even talk about it. I even say to people, I'm like, why in the hell aren't you fighting for more? All you're getting out of this is what they say from 5 containers. I said it was at least 34 containers, and all of it went over here. I said they're paying you, 1/6, 1/7, 1/6, 1/7 the amount that they should be paying you. Why are you settling with, 5 containers? People are afraid to stand up to these corporations, to the authorities. It's really something. I never thought that anything like this, was possible, that people would be so cowardice. And I understand it. I'm not saying I'm some kind of courageous, character, but I mean, I've been a coward before in my life. I have, shame, from not standing up and helping somebody when I should have, and I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to be a coward. There's a lot more. There's a lot more I could say about this matter, over here with, with what was done. Still, nobody talks about Pennsylvania, you know. I did mention some things here, but let me now put together what it is, why it is we were talking. I came in on this subject of using insects as vectors, to spread disease, like pathogens in a far as a biological warfare application. If I can use that kind of use those words for this, but you see, I'm a 2-branch veteran. I started my service in the Army National Guard, and then I wanted to go regular, full time, but I didn't want the Army, so, I wanted to go in the Air Force. That's what I did. I was a career airman, then I went in the Air Force. I served honorably. I served our nation honorably with distinction. The thing is that after a while being monitored, surveilled so tight, I had the governor's ear, and I asked him about what I'm going to say. I want to share with you, and then I asked the Biden administration, and I sent a lot of pleas to the Trump administration. I've been really trying to get some help from them. With no answer from them, no answer from anybody. But I said what my request was. It was simple. I said, look, I said, my civil liberties have been stomped upon. I couldn't get any of this out to anyone, even people, let them know, even here in Pennsylvania, the thousands of people that got dosed that don't even know it. I said, maybe you could do me a favor. I said, and drop the formality, just as you've dropped, there was no formalities with my being surveilled, my civil liberties being crushed, my being suffocated, like that, stepped on. Here's the thing. When I was, my service started off in the Army National Guard. I had quit school. I had left home. I had quit school. Situation at home was, my parents had come into money, and I was raised in a working poor stratum of society on a farm out in the country, and there was someone that liked my mom and my dad, and they left them some money. They left our family some money, and I wasn't a part of their plans. I got to see how money changes people and can affect people, and my mom and dad, everybody's gone now but my sister. But I loved my mom and dad dearly. I miss them. I think about them all the time. But money, I wasn't in their plans. As they were buying up shit. Having horses. Like they buy a horse trailer, a big horse trailer, and a inboard. A boat and a motor home and a sawmill. They wanted to have their own business and shit. Doing all kinds of shit. They're just buying all kinds of shit. But I was nowhere in their plans. And I was like, it was kind of disgusting to see. And I had left home. And I'm like, well, this ain't going to work out. Leaving home, I'm like, oh, shit. What am I going to do? So I said, why don't I join the Guard? And then I'd be gone for a while. I'd come back and we'll go from there. At least we'll get, I was like, okay. I was all about it. It was okay. But the thing is, I'm going to share something with you that's going to really blow your mind, or maybe not. The thing is, this is the testimony that I gave to 2 administrations now, asking them to drop their formality and help me to get a fair and just result from what was done to me when I served our nation with honor and distinction. What was done to me. Now you see, I think because I was a high school dropout, that's why I was flagged and used in what was a secret virus program. It made sense to me. I was given this bonus for this MOS that was the dumbest, MOS. Like, why would I be given a bonus? Anyway, that's one thing that was curious to me. But let me tell you what happened. There I am. I had to get my GED while I was, going through training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, 1983. I went through training when our Marines were killed in Beirut. That's when my cycle was going through training. I went through the basic training in the same barracks that my uncle Bobby went through basic training. The very same barracks atop of Tank Hill. The same barracks. Isn't that amazing? He went to Vietnam and he got exposed to Agent Orange and got eaten up with bone cancer. He died. But, we both went through basic training in the same barracks even, atop of Tank Hill at Fort Jackson. So I'm in the shot line. We go through immunizations. They separated me and a few other guys out of the immunizations. And I was like, I had this adrenaline hit. Because I'm like, why are you separating us out of here, Now, we were all getting the same shots. We all get the same shots. I knew that. Yeah, I was smart enough, to realize it was more than just smart. I was given like a quickening, and I only a few times in my life have I had a serious adrenaline spike, and that was one of them right then. And I asked the nurse that was doing the prep in the line, like the, oh my goodness, hold on. Excuse me. I've got a medical condition other than my disabilities from what happened to me in the Air Force. I had something I'm going to share with you, and it's acting up right now. Again, I'm going through a bit of a bout with this retrovirus. The thing is, I've been fighting this for all these years, 43 years, without health care, a lot of times using horse, like veterinary antibiotics and ciprofloxacin, you use for fish and whatever I can get my hands on, trying to, and whatever Z-Packs I can squeeze out of making a deal with somebody to barter. All kinds of shit like that through the years. Bactrim, you know, was always something that was kind of harsh but worked. But the thing is, in this shot line, I had an adrenaline hit, and I asked the nurse that was prepping for the shots in the line, I said, why, what is going on here? And she looked at me like she had such pity for me. She knew something about what was going on. We all got so sick, man. You know, we barely made it through boot camp. I was just, I'm telling you, it was just, there was no way that I was going to be recycled. And I suppose that's what it was with the other guys too, you know. And we were all guardsmen. And, oh shit, man. It was bad. I'd never been so sick, and I was healthier than I'd ever been in my life. Stronger than ever, you know? And then when we went on to, here, let me share this. Those barracks that I went through training in, we were the last cycle to go through those barracks. They were torn out right after we were done. I think it was done for some type of a safety precaution and protocol with, the type of experiment that they conducted with those pathogens. Now, initially, I didn't see, anyone else, like the contagion with it wasn't, like, you didn't see it, with the other guys that were there. Just us that were injected with the shit got, really sick. But here's the thing about whatever designer pathogen that they injected us with. When we went to AIT, at Fort Gordon, Georgia, there they purposely put me in a bay with 7 other guys. And I was so sick, man. I'm telling you in truth, I don't remember my training at Fort Gordon, Georgia. All I remember is how sick I was. And I remember that there were these like Puerto Ricans or all Spanish speaking soldiers, young kids that were, they hardly could speak English, that were there in that bay that I was in. All 7 of those guys that were in that bay with me were taken away. They got that sick. So it was highly contagious, whatever they gave me. Like it was designed, I guess. I'm guessing at this because we didn't have like as sick as I was through boot camp, not everybody got that shit. It was just the people that were injected, it seemed to me. I was like, man, look at this. I knew something was up, man, from the time we were separated into that line. But, yeah, everyone that was in the bay that I was in at Fort Gordon, they were taken away. I never saw them again. They were, I'm guessing they were hospitalized. They were so sick. I was sick. I should have been, I'm saying I was so sick I should have been hospitalized. And it wasn't just in that bay. And I don't know how many guys, it wasn't just me. Was it just me? Was I the Typhoid Mary? Was that what, what I'm saying? Was it just me, or was there several guys there that were there for, from Fort Gordon? Because the, I guess that would be a training brigade, battalion, I don't know, battalion there that I was in at Fort Gordon. The battalion commander came out and he gave us, he's out there, he's like, gargle with salt water. He's like telling everyone, because everybody, it seems, was sick. But the ones that I was with personally in that bay, they were all taken away. I saw that, like, they're gone. And I don't know if it was if I'm the reason solely, or if there were other guys. Honestly. So when I got to when I got back to Newcastle, Pennsylvania, that's where my battalion, the 229th Field Artillery Battalion, that was my home. I told my CO, I told our first sergeant, I was like, man, I'm telling you, they injected me with something, and then we had to go back for other shots too. I'm saying they gave me something, and I said, I don't know what the hell it is. And they weren't interested in anything I had to say about it. Nobody was. The thing is that I was strong, and it's like I would, what I've learned about this what was flagged as a retrovirus, because when I did finally have some health care, I was able to get blood drawn then. I'm talking about civilian realm, my wife's health care, and it's a retrovirus. It's what it's flagged as. My wife has never gotten it. She's never gotten sick from me. We've been together 33 years. So, when it's even bad with me, when it flares up, like I can tell each and every time, the symptoms were the same. I was just the same as when how I was going through training, being sick. Like it goes into like walking pneumonia, powerful, horrible bronchitis, and then walking pneumonia. It goes it goes into a bacterial infection. It's viral though. So, going and when I went through when I was still in the Guard, we went to our 2-week drill at Fort Pickett, Virginia. And would you believe, there, they instructed us. Now we're getting to what I was talking about with this vector. Using insects as a vector. In a biological warfare. Program, whatever, as a weapon to weaponize. Just how to distribute, to how to infect. What like how would you do this? Like how would you using vectors is what you would use. My sugar must be low. Excuse me. But they told us to strip down nude, like in a buddy system, and strip down nude, and on the hour count the ticks that were on us. So they at Fort Pickett, they were again using using guardsmen there, to test out, whatever vector they had dumped in there, to see if it would, how well it would work out. Isn't that something on what I'm telling you? I knew that, after what was done to me, getting injected with that shit at Fort Jackson, I was like, I knew, I'm like, you know what? They said they gave us a bottle of insect repellent. And they're like, we want to see how well the repellent works. And I looked at that and I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. You're so full of shit. I know full well this ain't about the goddamn insect repellent. This is about the fucking ticks. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, it was disgusting. That's why I didn't want to go regular Army. But I did want to go regular, and I went Air Force. They wanted a high school diploma, and it was wild because I found out that I only needed 4 credits. I was amazed because I quit. I thought in my junior year, but anyway, correspondingly, I ended up getting the same diploma as if I would have graduated with my class. So, it looks like I'm a high school graduate. That's what I am. I am a high school graduate. So I was able to do it correspondingly with four credits. Hallelujah, in Jesus' name. So that's what I went in the Air Force. Now hear me on this. I brought this up. I testified to this, and I'm like, hey, I said, there was no formality with my civil liberties being stomped upon. I said, can you help me to get a fair and just result for what was done to me being used as a test subject in a secret virus program? I said, can you help me with this? Can I see some compensation from this? I said, drop the formality. You have done, I'm sure, a thorough background check on me. Not only did I capture this Fallout video, this multi-billion-dollar irrefutable evidence of the criminality of Norfolk Southern and, the complicitness with the authorities that were involved in that to cover up, the contamination and allow thousands of people to remain oblivious intentionally because they didn't want to have to pay, for the damages. And then what now you have is criminal. It's criminal now, man. It's totally criminal. Criminal. And I said maybe you can help me to get a fair and just result. Now hear me on this, because you're going to wonder why I asked for, what I've asked for with a fair and just result, because there's more. With my service in the Air Force, um, I ended up getting the job I wanted because they were going to make me a security cop, and my training would have been at Lackland. That's where that's where you stay, and it's the gateway at Lackland Air Force Base for the Air Force, but it's also where you would train to be a security cop, to be the Air Force Police. And I had a portfolio together, as a graphic illustrator, and I wanted to be that for the Air Force. I wanted to serve as a graphic illustrator. And my training instructor, one of them, I'm sorry I don't remember his name, even though I can remember my two drill sergeants from Army, Sergeant Bass and Sergeant Canady. Bass was a junior, Canady was a senior, and Bass knew something was going on with us when we got sick, by the way. I don't know what he knew, but you could tell because he was merciful with us, that were so sick. But I didn't remember the training, the guys that the training instructors, the Air Force, but those guys they were so great, man. One of them, he was so decent. He let me go and for an interview. He set it up for me with my portfolio, which was really just so cool. I showed him my portfolio, and he did that for me. I was so grateful, and I got it. Matter of fact, my Air Force picture, I missed out on getting my picture, with my squadron, because I was, at administration, being interviewed. It was amazing. And at that interview, do you know that there was a guy that I went through Army basic, a guy that was there, the same kind of situation. He had gone active Air Force, and he was in the Guard, went through the same training cycle I did. I can't remember his name. He might have then had the virus. He would as well. I'm telling you the truth. Not only did I meet up with that guy there at Lackland, that I can't at the moment think of his name, but when I went to Altus Air Force Base, he ended up being stationed there too. So miraculous. That guy is, I wonder, he probably was injected in line with me as well. He was quite a comedian. I can't think of his name. But anyway, I went on to Altus Air Force Base from, that was my first duty assignment. My squadron, though, my command was at Lackland, the 1365th Audiovisual Squadron. Now, being an audiovisual, being what my work there at Altus was everything from doing the graphics in simulators, for pilots, for the aircraft and military airlift command and SAC and TAC. We did it all. We could have a part. We did have a part in different jobs that way, because we were in service to them all. But also we would put together briefings, whether it was on 35 millimeter or view graphs, where you have briefings, any briefing, we're talking about some, yes, that no matter what the briefing is, you're going to need some visuals, you know what I mean? Like, you can, that's, it's interesting, isn't it? The kind of work that, you as a graphic illustrator that you would do in there. But it also designed military crests, like organizational crests, like stuff like that as a designer. I was a specialist as a lettering artist. So I would hand letter calligraphy, like that kind of chancery cursive calligraphy, like citations and retirement certificates. But we do a lot, you name it, anything that's visual, audio, visual, we would have work brought into us, to communicate, like it was a great job. And listen, from the time I got there though, it wasn't sweet early on. What happened was, is I had a boss, my NCO IC. His name was Stanley Beauchamp, and he was like, you know, um, imagine the most Malcolm X kind of like prejudiced black man you've ever met, but then go ahead and give him like a street, more of a street attitude, where he even would talk about killing whites, killing white people. That's how bad he was, and that's the kind of things that he would say. Um, my first dealing with him was he separated me from everybody in my job and put me in this area in the upstairs in the attic, and I didn't have any equipment or anything. And I was told by people were telling me, they're like, hey, this guy, he's really sadistic. People in the unit who I was not brought in with, like I was separated from everybody. And they said he thinks he's some kind of he's psychoanalyzing you. He's taken classes in psychology, and he thinks of himself as a clinical psychologist. Honestly, this is what I went through, and I was like, man, okay, whatever, I'm okay with this, but man, it really felt bad, and the people that I was supposed to be working with, when we were off duty, they were coming up to me. They were like, hey, just be patient. Be patient. He's not going to be here. Some would say he's not going to last long. They were like, someone's going to replace him, or just be cool. Don't worry. And these were people that had been there for a while. They were coming up to me and telling me, hey, we know it's fucked up what he's doing to you, but just be patient. It'll be all right. And this is the real deal. So my first dealings with this guy, that's what they were. And I don't know what it was. I had, I was a believer in Christ, but I wasn't in the Word. If I'd have been in the Word, what it was that happened next would have never happened. But unfortunately, I couldn't. It got to the point where I couldn't handle it. Like I needed to talk to somebody. I was raised in an environment where it was nigger this, nigger that, and my family they'd brag about my great grandfather being in the Klan and all this things. You know what I mean? So I was raised in that environment, and there was something that happened to me when I was in elementary school. In sixth grade, we had one black boy that was in our whole school. His name was Michael Carter. He was in my class, sixth grade, and he's standing there around this desk, this school desk, and it was myself, Michael Carter, and two other kids. I see the kids all the time in my mind, but I can't remember who they were. Though I do. Right now, I think I know who they were. But I don't know what it was that I said that hurt Michael Carter so bad. But when I said it, I realized that I had said something that I just only said because I had heard it said so often by my people that I was raised with. You know what I mean? It was like an automatic, like reaction, like what you would like if, like what's it called, like when you get that test and they tap you on your knee, like a knee jerk kind of like. I mean, it's like a reaction, and it came out of me when I said it. I don't know what I said to this day. I don't know what I said, but I felt. I'm gonna let you know in Jesus' name, God caused me to feel that kid's pain. And it's like time stood still at that moment. And I felt this kid's pain. And it was horrible. And
inside I was dying, man. And I begged God. I said, please help me. I don't want to be like this. Because I realized that it was people I was around, that I was just projecting what they had put on me. And I repeated it. And it was horrible. Then the next thing I know, my dad worked at a cement company in Wampum, Pennsylvania, Medusa Cement Company, and there was a black guy there. His name was Ernie Johnson. My dad introduced me to him, and then it ended up Ernie was my mentor, another mentor of mine. He would take me night hunting, with dogs, and he helped me to. I learned how to train and run dogs, coonhounds, and I spent a lot of nights with Ernie, and I had the utmost respect and love for Ernie Johnson. And he was the first black person, in my life, and he was a godsend. Why I bring this up is I had never met anyone like Stanley Beauchamp. And I got involved with this black girl that worked in this hospital squadron, a fellow service member, Air Force member, and we ended up getting married. Stanley Beauchamp, man, all through this with this, I'm dating her. He is fucking on me, man. Every time he'd get me alone, he would fucking just like trap me, and he would say things like that were like he was always like, "Yeah, Makosha, I've had." This is the way he talked. He was from Kentucky, and he'd say, "Yeah, Makosha, I've had Japanese pussy. I've had Filipino pussy. I've had German pussy. I've had all kinds of pussy. But that black pussy, it's the best, ain't it, Yamakosha? Huh? Is that what it is with you? That black pussy?" Now, that's light. The kind of way that this guy would treat me, I really can't convey, because I'm not going there. If there's no way that I could convey, like, bring you down to the kind of level where it was when he'd get into his tirades about how he hated whites, and like he would say things about O.J. Simpson in the movie The Klansman was his favorite movie, and that was the kind of thing he. This whole thing with me being with this black girl, this fellow service member, really pissed him off, and like there was no talking to him about it. He just was all over me about it. And the thing is, you don't know. It's like I don't know. I'm being real light about this, but it was so bad, and I had nobody to talk to about this fucking guy. And I thought, well, you know what? I had nobody. I was with a detachment. My headquarters was at Lackland, San Antonio, Texas. I was in Elsis, Oklahoma. I don't know if, looking back, yeah, I would have reached out to them instead of what I did. What I did was I went to base social actions about it. The base there, Elsis Air Force Base, had a social actions unit. Oh man, what a mistake that was. The CO over there, his name was Captain Ayers. And I knew it, man, from the moment I walked in there that social actions wasn't for a white person going in about a complaint about a prejudiced black person, because it was set up entirely for blacks, to that have complaints against whites. That's the way it was, and I was naive to think anything different, I guess. But Captain Ayers, man, he was like I was talking to an enemy and trying to convince him to be my friend. And my enemy is a wall, because there was no way I could penetrate him. Like, he had nothing for me. Then when I got back to my detachment, Sergeant Beauchamp met me, and he was waiting for me, and he says to me, Airman Kosher, I'll say it the way he said it to me, Airman Kosher, I just got off the phone with Captain Ayers. He said you were over there saying bad things about me. Captain Ayers and I, we've been good friends for a long time. I'm paraphrasing. He may have said, Captain Ayers may have said is a good friend of mine, and he switched it around a little bit. I don't remember exactly how it went down. All I know is that I was like, man, what have I done? I talked to my aunt, about it in a phone conversation. She lived to where I live now in District 17, Pennsylvania. And she said, Jim, she said, I know our congressman here. I'll talk to him for you. Now, at the time, I didn't say anything, but I'm thinking red flags are going up. I'm like, that might not be such a great idea. I got to thinking about it like 3 weeks after I had the conversation with my Aunt Omi, Leoma Swetlick. I called her Aunt O. And I said, Aunt O. I called her back. I'm like, Aunt O, forget about what I said. I said, I really I don't want any trouble here. She said, Jimmy, I already talked to him. So then I'm thinking, what's going to happen? Congressman. I didn't even think about a congressional inquiry because I didn't know what that would lead to. I didn't know what a congressional inquiry was or anything. I'm like, I didn't know. I didn't know where it was going to go. But I'm thinking, this can't be good. Now, that might have had something to do with what happened next. Now, I ended up, look, things were, okay, a couple things happened. Beauchamp had black friends around the base, and also with the hospital squadron. They made my wife at the time miserable and caused a lot of problems between us. We ended up separating because of the pressure they put on our relationship. Ended up getting a divorce. I can tell you we left amicably, meaning, I've been with my wife now for 33 years. I love her dearly. But there was a few years ago, like 10 years ago, Sherelle called me and, she was like, let's get married again. It's like we didn't leave on bad terms. Almost ruined my marriage of then 20 some years. I didn't leave on bad terms with her. It was the bad situation we were in. Thank God that I didn't, my wife, that I didn't fall into, betraying her that way. That's it. I didn't. But the thing is, so I went through this divorce, and as this was all happening, at the same time, I'm thinking, what's going to happen with this this congressman? Is there going to be somebody that's going to come here and check on what? Anyway, I was really dedicated to the work that I did for the Air Force. I had a lot of ambition and whatever talent. I knew how to direct my talent to get noticed. I'm just going to let you know. I was noticed and then awarded for being the best that the Air Force had in my AFSC. I was awarded that. I was able to become an NCO without having to go to the NCO school. And because I was told that they were cutting orders for me to serve at the Pentagon in honor of just being awarded as the best that the Air Force had in my job, my AFSC. So, I was about ready to go to the Pentagon and serve at the Pentagon. And all I could think was, man, I want to do everything I can to, get noticed, and I might even be doing work for the president. I was excited about the whole thing. And just around that time, that congressional inquiry then hit the base, just after hearing that news. And I went from being like at the pinnacle, as an enlisted man where I could be. My future looked pretty bright. You know what I mean? It couldn't have been brighter. and they did something, whereas two airmen, Airman Bemis and Airman Dallaire, they were probably told to do this by Beauchamp or, my unit, because to set me up in the shop and have me removed from my detachment and have me assigned to prisoners, working with prisoners on the base. Now, why did they do that? You're thinking, what would the congressional inquiry have to do with that? Here's what it has to do with that. I was told that my base commander, Colonel Hazeltine, was passed over for Brigadier General because of the congressional inquiry. That's what they told me. That he was passed over because of the congressional inquiry about the social actions issue with me. I'm not making that up. That's what it was, okay? Now, when I was told that, I was like, damn, I could see it, but I'd done work for Colonel Hazeltine, and working relationship, professional relationship, it's part of the reason why I was awarded, for being the best that the Air Force had in my AFSC. It was work that I had done for him. We had just gotten the C-17. It had been our base had been awarded with, was going to be the training base for C-17, Altus Air Force Base, MAC, Military Airlift Command. So I was like, I'd done a lot of work for Colonel Hazeltine. A lot, important kind of stuff, that got me noticed. I'm thinking I didn't think vindictive, like, is he doing this? Is he behind us? But then listen to this. They spent, it seemed like a couple months, me working in the shittiest kind of assignments on base, and they bring me back into the job, my detachment, every, so often, to downgrade me, off of tasks, things that I, was, I was a specialist, like I said, for lettering retirement certificates and award citations, shit like that. I was a lettering artist. And there's a mechanical lettering that's called Leroy lettering. And they brought me in there and had me do Leroy. And I was never good at Leroy. My skills as a graphic illustrator, I didn't even have to go to tech school, because my portfolio and what I had learned studying at a vocational school, I was, I'm saying I didn't need their training. So I never got to do Leroy lettering at there. That's the only thing, some shitty mechanical lettering that I would, nobody wanted that for their retirement certificates. They wanted the lettering I would do, the hand lettering, the calligraphy, but do you believe that they used that, testing me on Leroy? They did other things, but this is one I'm just highlighting. Like, they had me do it, and they tested me to see if I was proficient in it, and then by downgrading me from that, they were able to affect me somehow with my records, to make it look like I was somehow, the little things like that to make me look like I was incompetent. But whatever they backdated and fabricated, it took them time. Well, while I was out there doing details like cleaning out barracks, carrying out the old mattresses and shit from barracks, you know what I mean, when they was remodeling them. That's the kind of work they were having me do, or picking up cigarette butts out at the front gate, and shit like that. Whatever the hell it was. All kinds of shit details is what I'm saying. They were putting together whatever they could to try to justify, firing me. But I knew that that's what they were doing. I intuited that. No one told me that, but I knew that's what was happening. But I had no access to anybody. They restricted me to base, but I wasn't in jail. I wasn't a prisoner, but I was assigned to work with the prisoners. This is true. My last duty assignment, that's when my headquarters was at Lackland Air Force Base, but they had me assigned to base headquarters, where Colonel Hazeltine was the commander. I was under his command, my last duty, and that's where they had this staff sergeant that was stationed in front of me. His duty was to make sure that I did not slouch, but that I was ordered at attention to sit at attention in this chair in front of him, this wooden chair. Now, I haven't mentioned this, but I had injuries that had happened when I was in the Air Force that were serious spinal injuries that led to my having to have 2 spinal fusions. And I was ordered to sit at attention with those raw injuries to my spine. And I told them that. And they wouldn't let me go to the hospital or anything. Now, for me, it actually was torture. But I think that for anybody that is ordered to sit at attention, and here's the thing, you can believe it or not, but it's the truth. I lost track of the days that I was seated at attention. And I realized that I had lost track of the days. And then I had this epiphany. I was like, this must be, because I felt it. I didn't, when I say I felt it, I recognized it, that something snapped, that I had crossed a barrier or something in my mind, because it took so much for me to do that. I had to convince myself that what I was doing was duty, and the guy that was assigned in front of me, this black staff sergeant, he knew my wife, ex-wife then now. And he, because of his prejudice, he didn't like me. The first sergeant, I'm talking about first sergeant of the base command, he didn't know me. And he treated me like I was a shitbird, because all he knew is whatever they told him, and I don't know what they told him about me. But no one had any leniency or mercy for me, man. And, I told them, I said, I got injuries to my spine, when I was given permission to speak. I said, I can't do this. And they told me, they said, well, if you don't do it, we're giving you a direct order. And then I knew what time it was, because they said, you'll be given a dishonorable discharge. So it wasn't like they were beating on me. They weren't beating on me, but they didn't have anything on me. And I knew I could beat it if I could have. He just kind of took the fight out of me. I guess it was just what I went through. It was a bit too much, I guess, where I lost my eyes are fucking burning because it's goddamn sugar. The VA has had me wait going on 8 years. I've needed hip replacement surgery. 8 years. It has ground me down, man. I wasn't, I became insulin dependent because I've become so inactive because of this pain from the needing hip replacement surgery. They stalled me. It's going on 8 years. Would you believe that? So, I guess I'm thinking as I was there, seated at attention, where I was, my detachment, I knew I had them. If I want this, man, I've got it. It's just a matter of how, whatever legal processes I have to go through, I said, I knew it, I'm like, but then I'm just thinking about the fighting, and I'm thinking where I couldn't see myself being somewhere else. Like, would they station me somewhere else to fight this And I thought about being with them after what they had done to me, and knowing that I didn't have anyone there, like I was all alone. And I don't know, it just, you lose, I didn't, it didn't, it didn't, it didn't seem like it was worth fighting for, after a while. It didn't seem like it was worth fighting for. I wish I could have, even after, because they had the way that things went so badly, because I went through that divorce and I was left, with hardly anything, except my bicycle and some clothes. But they had taken all my stuff out that I had when they took me out to the front gate. When I agreed to sign whatever they wanted me to sign, my bicycle was waiting for me on outside of the gate. I was like, wow, that's wild. They took my bike and put it on the outside of the gate, for me to ride away on. And they told me I was banned then from the base because they thought that I would be vindictive, I guess, because of what they had done to me. Now, the first shirt, in the Air Force, it's the first shirt, not a first sergeant. The first shirt that was over the torture at the base command, when he had that clipboard with that paperwork for me to sign, he leaned over to me and he said to me, like, seemingly it was sincere. I questioned it because after what they had done to me, it was hard for me to trust, like, man, it was bad. But he said, you don't have to sign this. Like, he made me think that maybe he was beginning to see, that maybe what was being done to me was wrong. I don't know. But look, I'm telling you this because that's, I said to, both the Biden administration and now the Trump administration, if you'd see the thread, I've been sending President Trump, I've sent him so many communications asking for a fair and just result. Consider that, after all of this that I've been through I said, especially being surveilled over this multi-billion-dollar disaster that was hidden, and my having the irrefutable evidence that, actually I tried my best, contacting everyone, Justice Department, State Department, every, congressman, senator, the state attorneys general, the local AG, everybody. I've contacted everyone and shared with them what I shared here and more, I said, after all this, I said, and I know I haven't mentioned this, but I also lived up in, well, my wife and I, of 33 years, my wife, Norsiva, and we lived up in New York City for over a decade. We moved up there. And, good Lord. I had the spinal fusions, and I had to have them done outside of the VA because the VA turned me away. I've taken a polygraph about that because I waited years to file for any compensation. And, I needed a buddy statement about something that happened, and, then when I did talk to a polygraph examiner, a former government, like a polygraph examiner, to help me, but he wasn't there for me. It's like he would do it for me. He didn't shine any liking me until after it was determined that I wasn't lying. You know what I mean? But one of the questions, because when he interviewed me, I was telling him I turned me away. I needed to hit the two spinal fusions, and the VA turned me away. They interviewed me and turned me away. And he said, and then he ended up asking me about that with the polygraph. I guess he didn't believe me. But yeah, they turned me away. But anyway, why did I mention up there? Hold on. Oh, thank you. The good thing is, I recorded also the most complete World Trade Center attack video that's ever surfaced. It's like in the life in the like in the day, like it's a day in the whatever, I can't remember how it is, that it's like an adage, but it was like I had my video camera the whole night before the attacks, carried it with me. I stayed up all night, and then I had it with me, and I was making a short film in the early morning, like keeping my hand in the creative process. And I'm having breakfast with my neighbor, and then we get word from a friend of his that the North Tower, that a plane had flown into the North Tower. Then I went up on my fire escape and captured the South Tower, the plane flying into it, and everything else, all the way through, both of them going down, and then meeting my wife in Hoboken that afternoon when Building 7 went down. Right at that time, I was over there, saw the plume from that building, but I met my wife coming over on the New York Waterway, the ferry, because everything else was closed down. See, I was on the phone with her as I was recording the video, and I was trying to convince her, like, come home, because I told her, I'm like, everything's going to be shut down, the tunnels, the bridges. I said, you got to get out of there. But I was powerless, able to get her out. But you see, I captured that 9/11 chronicle, and I waited a decade to release it, and it was kind of suspicious, I think, when I released it, and I was monitored, then by the National Security Agency. It drew a lot of attention, and I think because when they took over my Facebook page and my YouTube, I think they use it even now for anyone that's interested in seeing anything about that. It's like if there's any, they can, what I mean? It's like almost like a way that they can monitor and find out people that maybe are a little bit too interested in that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? But I was monitored over that, and there was probably a background check and everything that was done on me then. And I said, I know that ever since I released this video of this massive multi-billion-dollar disaster here, that the evidence about the illegality and the criminality of that, I said, there was a background check done on me. So I said, and there was no formality in my having my civil liberties stomped on, where I can't even contact anybody, being heavily surveilled and monitored. I said, so could you do me a favor and drop the formalities and look into my military records and give me a fair and just result for what was done to me while I served our nation honorably with distinction? And without them telling me, like, what, if ever they would, what they were going to do for me, I asked them, I said, I think that retirement status, I would like that. Retirement status from the date of discharge from the United States Air Force, which is July 26th, 1989. And then I thought about the pay grade. No, not just, a box sergeant, but, I'm thinking E8. I said, E8 sounds good to me. E8 over 23 years with back pay from the date of discharge. Now, I told you that I was awarded as being the best that the Air Force had at that time, the best that they had in my AFSC, and that all of this is all. There are different sets of records. My command at Lackland Air Force Base, the 1365th Audio Visual Squadron, there should be a complete record of them. You know, they were in talks to have they were working on getting my orders for me to work at the Pentagon to serve in honor of my being awarded, you know, being the best that the Air Force had in my AFSC. So, if I would have gone to the Pentagon without them doing this to me, what they did to me, if they wouldn't have done what they did to me, I believe that I could have gone as high as the ceiling was as an enlisted man, but I'll settle with, you know, an E8 pay grade. And I say over 23 years, yes, because I probably would have stayed in over 23 years. But that doesn't take into account, you know, that I would have gotten out of the service and probably worked in a GS position, making a shitload of money there. So my asking for what I have is not unreasonable at all. If I had a Trump attorney on this for what I just told you, don't you think I'd have a $100 million fucking lawsuit with this? For the secret virus program being used, you know, in that program alone. Don't you think so? I don't know if I mentioned this enough, emphasized enough, but my being a high school dropout, I think that had something to do with me being chosen for that. They probably, if you would look at who it was they selected, they might have been all high school dropouts. Like, what is a high school dropout? And when I say that, you think about you can't help but think about somebody that's worth a lot less than somebody that is a graduate, right? You think about somebody that drops out of high school. That's just the way it is, isn't it? You know? Our prejudice against anyone that would, you know, drop out of high school for whatever reason. I'm sweating, man. I think my sugar's dropped down low. But that's all I've got to say about that. The vectors. A little bit deeper than a vector, huh? Yeah. After all that I have shared, the irrefutable evidence about the criminality, the abject criminality, the insidious, the evil that's been done, the crimes against thousands of U.S. citizens, Pennsylvanians, who were, in truth, kept oblivious to be then contaminated with a cocktail of industrial chemicals, carcinogens, from a massive illegal burn-off that was managed by Norfolk Southern on the Pennsylvania border from February 3rd, 2023 through February 6th and 7th. For 3 days, they illegally burned off millions of pounds of carcinogens. At least 34 railroad containers that were carrying carcinogenic hazardous materials. They worked with the Ohio authorities and they worked with federal authorities to keep it all quiet. And in truth, I have the evidence they worked with the media who supplanted the lying narrative that it was East Palestine that was the disaster, when in fact the derailment, the fires, the managed fires, meaning the burn off of all
that was on that site of the derailment, it was all on the Pennsylvania border, on the outskirts east of East Palestine. Pennsylvania is east of Ohio. All of the winds from the fires blew to the east. Now, Norfolk Southern is they're handling that way. They're handling some kind of a silencing settlement that I opted out of. My name is James Cozier. I captured video that I had sent out to the media the day before they did the massive disposal, illegal burn off of everything that was left on this site. I sent it out to all the media of them burning off containers on the tracks, in Pennsylvania. From Pennsylvania, I captured the video. I sent it out, and also captured the massive, what was a fallout, meaning the burn off of the massive burn off that people were familiar with when they saw that gigantic plume from East Palestine. I captured the actually where it ended up going here in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, District 17, Beaver and Lawrence County. There is a complete record on radar and satellite imagery that irrefutably shows that none of the winds ever carried any of the contamination to the west. It was all blown onto Pennsylvanians who were intentionally left oblivious. I captured the media on time-stamped cellular video, WTAE Channel 4 Action News, sitting where I took the third video on the 6th at the junction of Route 168 and Route 51. They were sitting there, Channel 4 Action News. They never aired any footage. They never sounded any alarms. They never made any report of what it was that I captured with them there, which was massive, carcinogenic, chemical-laden smoke clouds, massively, that were dragging on the ground through western Pennsylvania at 2 to 3 miles per hour. And they sat there silently. Our federal authorities, they knew that the fallout was happening. They knew what was going on. Nobody sounded any alarms because, you see, it was a multi-billion-dollar disaster in Pennsylvania that they worked with the corporations to keep it quiet so that those chemical companies that Norfolk Southern was hauling for and Norfolk Southern wouldn't have to pay. So then, they went from, it's a criminal case. There should be people in jail. I've explained this many times, and I've sent out all of this information to everyone that I could from here locally, where I live, all the way up to two administrations, the Biden and the Trump administration. And none of our authorities have the decency, have the courage, have the integrity to even refer to what was done as criminal or illegal. Now, what really, has struck me as even like Nazi, kind of like, it's Nazi. You think of Nazi war crimes, like when you think about a population being intentionally kept oblivious, like what I just said, that crime is like on the level of evil of like Nazi war crimes. And then now you see J.D. Vance. Let me just say one thing in truth about J.D., which everything I've said is irrefutably true, and so is it that he went over to East Palestine and he put his foot in a stream that I believe was purposely contaminated with chemicals from those, like Norfolk Southern. They had contractors that did that because then they ran these aerators in the stream to make a misting of the chemicals in the town of East Palestine when it was evacuated, because there wasn't any trace of chemicals in the town, and there would be independent investigators that would be doing testings. And when they did, and if they would have discovered no trace of chemicals, then obviously, if they weren't already so obtuse, they must be really slow or willfully ignorant. But I'm saying, what would their reports state? All of those millions of pounds of chemicals, and they can't find, a trace of them in East Palestine, which they wouldn't have, because it all blew onto Pennsylvania. So I'm telling you that they use these massive aerators, these powerful aerators, and put them in a stream that they purposely put chemicals into, so that they can mist certain chemicals into East Palestine. They did that. But you see, J.D. Vance went over there. He was a senator in Ohio, not from that area. Those weren't his constituents. And he went over there, put his foot down in the stream, literally, and made a little video and everything. What he did is that he showed those multi-billion-dollar corporations that when he would tell them, as a lot of politicians will tell, these multi-billion-dollar corporations, hey, don't worry about it. If something happens, you can depend on me. I'll help you. But this guy, he went over there and literally walked it. He walked the talk. He put his foot in the stream in East Palestine, and he raised his hands and he said, look at this. While all of the evidence on radar and satellite imagery and everything else shows irrefutably that the contamination was Pennsylvania. He went over there in East Palestine and did that. So then what did the multi-billion-dollar corporations do? Because J.D. Vance was never on a short list to be vice president for Donald Trump. If you know anything about the things that J.D. Vance said about Donald Trump, you know that he was not on a short list to be considered for vice president. But those corporations, I believe they insisted upon it after J.D. showed himself to be someone they could count on. So now he's also the one that's handling this new chapter in all of this post-derailment. I had heard that Donald Trump, in Trump's name, there was $10 million allocated for something to do with this derailment. And it was the only thing that it was referenced to was East Palestine. That in itself, was really bothered me, because I had sent everything out to President Trump, and I was hopeful that, being the maverick that he can be, being that he is one that, if anyone would come up against, these multi-billion-dollar corporations to bring them to justice, he has the personality, someone that would break out and do that. But instead, do you know what the $10 million, what it looks like to me, is that it's to study. It turns the people that were contaminated by this cocktail of carcinogens, it turns the whole deal into a laboratory, and that those that were contaminated now are the test subjects where they'll be studying them. That's what the money is going towards. But you see, they're basing it like it's the people in East Palestine they're going to be testing. Well, that isn't where if there is going to be, a lot of people that develop health problems from the exposure from the contamination, it's going to be people in Pennsylvania, not Ohio, not East Palestine, but Western Pennsylvania, District 17, Beaver and Lawrence County. The thousands of people there that were dosed to whatever degree. Those will be the people that will be monitored. Of course, you see, since they strategically have positioned the disaster in East Palestine, and you can't find any report of the massive contamination of Pennsylvania, they can continue on with that narrative of East Palestine, but they've got the money now to monitor secretively, you know what I mean? Watching and studying people that were contaminated in Pennsylvania. You have to listen to what J.D. Vance says and know that he's representing those multi-billion-dollar corporations. And everything I just said is absolutely true. Here, you can listen to it.
Here, and I want to take you back to something that happened early on when I was... Hey guys, Vice President J.D. Vance here, and I want to take you back to something that happened early on when I was a United States Senator. There was a terrible train crash, and then there was a controlled burn of toxic chemicals that went into the atmosphere in East Palestine, Ohio, a little town in the northeastern corner of the state of Ohio. What happened then is that people got very worried, and I've been to East Palestine a number of times, and they're very worried about what are the long-term impacts of these chemicals in the water, in the air. What effect does it have on their kids and grandkids after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of exposure? And the crazy thing is, number one, we didn't have a good answer to that question. Science had never actually tried to understand what the long-term exposure of these trace chemicals would do to people. And the second crazy thing is that as much as I tried as a United States Senator to work with the Biden administration, they refused to do anything to actually study the effects of these long-term exposures on the people of East Palestine. Well, now we have a new president and a great new Secretary of Health and Human Services, and he's got an incredible announcement. We're finally going to study the effects on these chemicals and finally get to the bottom of what effect this terrible train crash and the ensuing consequences had on the people of East Palestine.
I want to start by thanking my friend, Vice President J.D. Vance, for his continued and persistent interest in this issue, which many Americans have already forgotten. On February 3rd, 2023, a Norfolk Southern freight derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. The wreck involved 38 cars carrying hazardous chemicals, which ignited and then spread in these prolonged fires. The East Palestine community members immediately began experiencing a range of initial health symptoms, including headaches and respiratory and skin and eye irritations, prompting concerns about the broader long-term impacts on maternal and child health. At the urging of Vice President, the National Institute of Health, under my direction, has launched a 5-year, $10 million research initiative to address health outcomes stemming from this calamity. This is the first large-scale, coordinated, multi-year federal study focused specifically on the long-term health impacts of the East Palestine disaster. The program will support robust, community-engaged epidemiological research to understand the impacts of exposures on short and long-term injuries. It will also support public health tracking and surveillance of the community's health conditions to help us make informed health care choices and take appropriate preventative measures. I want to thank Vice President Vance for not forgetting about the people of East Palestine, for making this an important issue, and for allowing us to launch this important initiative.
This is a big announcement, guys. I'm very, very excited about it.
I am absolutely delighted to make this announcement today, and I want to thank Vice President Vance and Secretary Kennedy for staying on this issue. The purpose and goal of the NIH, the mission, is to advance the health and well-being of the American people, and this is a concrete way that we're going to do that. The NIH is working to ensure that the people of East Palestine and the surrounding communities are listened to, cared for, and they get the answers they deserve. Today, the NIH has established a program to coordinate health-related research with public health department needs and clinical practice to respond to the health effects of the derailment. The train was carrying hazardous materials, including vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethylene glycol, and benzene residue, and community members have experienced a range of health issues following the incident. The NIH's multidisciplinary research program will focus on public health tracking and surveillance of the community's health conditions to support healthcare decisions and preventative measures. Importantly, the program will be community-led. It will emphasize extensive, well-coordinated communications among researchers, study participants, community stakeholders, and healthcare providers, and others to provide a comprehensive approach to address the affected community's health concerns. The NIH intends to allocate up to $10 million across 5 years. The deadline to submit proposals is July 21, and we anticipate starting research this fall. Thank you so much, and so proud to be working on this effort with you guys.
Thank you, guys. I want to thank the president for making this possible and thank these two guys for their hard work to actually implement this. This is a very big day, not just for the people of East Palestine, but for anybody who wants to understand the connection between the chemicals that we use every day and the effects that it has on people's health. No one has tried to do this in this particular way. I think it's going to benefit millions of Americans. We're going to know more than we knew because of the hard work of the guys standing next to me.
Was that, I mean, maybe you need to listen to it as I have several times, because I mean, what I said was true. They've just turned this into a laboratory to then just monitor and study people to see what the effects are of the cocktail of chemicals they were exposed to. These chemicals, there's been tests that have been done. They act like nothing is known about the carcinogenic factors involved with these chemicals. That is a blatant lie. They do know. What they don't know is the complex, the mixture of all of these chemicals. He only mentioned 4 chemicals. When I got the paperwork from the bullshit silencing settlement that's being handled by a court in northeastern Ohio, when the jurisdiction should be Pennsylvania, since the victims of the contamination are almost entirely, thousands we're talking about, of Pennsylvanians that got dosed, not people from Ohio. But it's basing it only on 5 containers, and the list of chemicals in the paperwork is something along the lines of like 20 to 30 different chemicals. There are so many of the chemicals that are mentioned. It wasn't just 4 or 5 chemicals. But this is bullshit. If you listen closely to what it is that said, if you have to turn the caption on to read it so that you can see it. And think about just how disgusting it is. This isn't about caring for the people, that are going to have health problems. 5 years is not shit. When you're talking about carcinogens, this is something that, like my uncle, when he was exposed to Agent Orange on an airstrip in Vietnam, it took 20 years for that to, manifest when he was just ate up with bone cancer. The carcinogens can take that long, 15, 20 years. 5 years is not the meter. So everything's intentional with that, but the money is used to put things in place, not to care for the people, but so that they can study, use whoever it was that was exposed to the chemicals as test subjects, and they'll be monitored. And the people they monitor in East Palestine, they aren't going to get much from them because they were evacuated, and the winds never carried those contaminants into East Palestine. All it takes for you to take a little road trip and you will see when you're standing on the border, where the border sign, Pennsylvania and Ohio border sign are, off of the road escapes my mind. It'll come back to me in a moment. But they had the road closed for nearly 2 years. But the road from Route 51 going into East Palestine, that road, you stand there on the border and you can throw a rock from the border sign and you can hit the derailment site. It's right there. It's right next to the road. And it is in Pennsylvania. We're talking about. Pennsylvania is where all of it blew into. You'll get it. I've been in conversations with people from East Palestine. Of course, they're all interested in making as much money as they can off of this. So they'll fight you. It is, whatever. It's. I don't even want to. I don't even want to. It's just disgusting. I mean, they won't fight for. This should tell you something. They will not fight for the amount of contamination. 5 containers with them is fine. If they're basing it on 5 containers, that's all they're getting comped for, compensation in the silencing settlement. They're okay with that. They're not going to push their luck and fight for 34 or 38 railroad containers of contamination that were actually burned off there on the Pennsylvania border, because they didn't get the contamination. And the name of that road escapes me as many times as I've talked about it. But it doesn't matter, the name of the road that runs from Route 51 to East Palestine. Taggart. The name of the road is Taggart Road. But this whole thing, I'm so disappointed in the Trump administration. I sent out everything to President Trump, and begged him to do the right thing, to bring these people to justice. And you heard them. They won't mention anything about the fact that they say it was a a train crash. It was a derailment that Norfolk Southern was found negligent in the derailment itself. And instead of them putting the fires out, they could have done that almost immediately from special firefighting teams that could have been brought from the Pittsburgh airport or from Cleveland. Both. Pittsburgh would have taken 40 minutes, not even closer than that. They could have had that fire put out within an hour of the derailment. They told the firemen folks to not put out the fires. The firemen stood west of the derailment in East Palestine, really, and watched Norfolk Southern manage that illegal burn-off. I was told that the firemen, they were looking at receiving somewhere around $70,000 apiece. So they had that incentive. Plus, you get the peer pressure. Anybody that's experienced that before, you're in a group and, you have people in the group that are like, I can really use that money, man. Don't fuck me up. Don't talk about this. Let's not talk about it. That's what they did. The firemen, each and every one, from the rookie all the way up to the chief of whatever fire station, those first responders, they all knew where all of that contamination went and it was going. Every fireman, they know where the smoke is going, when they respond to a fire. They knew that it was dangerous and they kept their mouths shut. So many of them have family and friends in Pennsylvania. And it was worth more receiving that $70,000 and maybe to get a new truck or something. Governor Shapiro, Pennsylvania's governor, he took a $7 million soft bribe publicly and said this was for first responders, to give to first responders. And I tell you in truth, those first responders were told to not put out the fires. They were essentially used as props, because the media reported on it and made it look like they were trying to put the fires out. The media. I tell you that I captured the media on timestamp cellular video under the massive fallout. They were there in the third video that I have, one of three I took on the 6th, of where you can see the sky is all blackened, and the you can see the massive smoke, poison smoke. It's dragging on the ground. I'm talking about massive, massive contamination. They were right there. They never gave anyone in Pennsylvania an opportunity to even tape up their windows and doors to mitigate the contamination, to shelter in place. People would have had to have heard the authorities sound the whistle, to do that. They trust our authorities. So, our authorities, our state, local, state, and federal authorities, they are all complicit, because even the National Weather Service, they had the radar. They know what the altitude was of that poisonous smoke, those carcinogens. They don't just see the images and all, that there is a lot of information contained within, that radar. It tells them the density of it and everything, so many details. They knew. Governor Shapiro knew that there were thousands of Pennsylvanians that were getting dosed with those carcinogens, and he kept his mouth shut. Governor Shapiro should not be in an office of public trust. Either should Governor DeWine. Governor DeWine of Ohio, he declared a false state of emergency after the media, someone from the media, got a hold of those people that were managing the illegal burn-off in East Palestine. When I sent out video I captured on the 5th of them intentionally burning off containers, I captured it from Pennsylvania, looking down the tracks. I sent it out to all the media I could think of, and how many of them, actually are corporate funded, and they responded by showing, showing Norfolk Southern that I had sent the footage within 2 hours of me sending out the footage, and a note I put in there. The note, I said, what if one of these containers, empties out and there's a hole in it, and it's hot and it sucks oxygen into it and explodes? I mean, that's something that, a layman, some farm kid from Western Pennsylvania like me might think. You grow up thinking about the danger of gas cans and what have you, on a farm. Of course, I didn't know, those containers can be pushed. Those guys knew what they were doing. They probably have done this kind of thing before, where they've used authorities to block off an area, so that nobody could get in there and see what they were doing, burning off shit. And there probably are cancer clusters around derailments. If you'd want to do that research, you probably would discover that there are, wherever the winds. You could look at the radar and satellite imagery from such a burn off, and you would know where the people are that were affected. Just as with this man-made disaster, you would know who got the most of it. Like the night of the derailment fires, that Friday the 3rd, you can see on radar, just like on the night of the 6th, there was not a natural cloud in the sky, so you can see it plainly. What it is. You can see the contamination, and it went all the way down, like to Rochester, Aliquippa. Now, if you can still see it going into Aliquippa, then how much of it that is there that you can't see? So you can see the particulates, and whatever's with the particulates, because the chemicals had a tendency, and the Honorable Phil Sagano, a fire chief from the Youngstown Fire Department, he went on Channel 27 Youngstown, who are heroic. They let him come on there, and so is the Honorable Chief Sagano. Chief, is that what they call it? Fire Department chief? Is that right, chief? Sorry. Anyway, he went on there and he said he's a hazardous material specialist, like an expert dealing with such things. And he said that there were chemicals involved in this derailment that when they are particulates, when they go up with the heat of the fire, and they go up so high, he said that they attract water molecules, and then they get heavy, and then they would come down. He said the weight of them, they'd come down. And that's exactly what you see in the videos that I captured, is what he explained would happen. So they had a heads up. They knew. They had a specialist. Sil Sagano told them. So it wasn't something by accident. They had an expert that came out and told them what would happen. They are totally, they can be prosecuted for what it was that was done, and they should be put in jail. Whoever was involved in the illegal burn off should be in jail, and everyone that was involved in the cover up, not just to censure, not just publicly castigate them. We need to put them in jail. They should do time. We need to have a precedence of lawfulness, not lawlessness, which is what we have now. Abject, the worst. This is the worst. And, it's, I have a playlist explaining more in depth what it was, in Jesus' name, what it was that I was able to see, allowed to see, what I know. And it's true. It's irrefutable. Everything I've spoken about this matter is true. And as many people as authorities that I've reached out to, no one will even have a conversation, except there was one senator. His office asked me, when I came to them with this irrefutable evidence, they point blank, they asked me, what do you want? What do you want? Meaning they thought I was trying to shake them down, looking for something. But I will tell you this. They stepped on my civil liberties. I was surveilled. I was monitored close so that I couldn't get the footage out. Because at first I was reaching out to everyone. I was asking what can be done to mitigate this exposure. I said, because these chemical companies, I know they have protocols if there's an accident in the plant where the chemicals are manufactured. I said, there has to be protocols whereas somebody gets exposed to this shit in an accident that can help. I said that's what needs to be done right now, because there's thousands of people in Pennsylvania that have gotten dosed with these carcinogenic industrial chemicals. And I was asking, even Norfolk Southern, I reached out to them. I said, what can be done? I said, do the right thing. Of course, they didn't do the right thing. Nobody did. But then they surveilled me close. So, I released everything. All the videos that I captured, I released them, and they were screen grabbed, and somebody with money, promotion, reposted them, headline, putting the title on them, Darlington, Ohio. There is a Darlington, Ohio. It's a long way to the west. They were never affected by anything from this derailment. Instead of Darlington, Pennsylvania, you're never going to hear, in any report about this on the media, anything said about this massive contamination of Pennsylvania. Because, in fact, the media did work for the multi-billion-dollar corporations. But I have asked the authorities. You see, when I served, I served in two branches of our armed forces. And in both of those branches, something was done to me that I should receive compensation for. And I said, since there was no formality with you stomping on my civil liberties, I said, would you please have the decency to look at my records? Because I know you've done a thorough background check on me. Because another thing, I lived up in New York City. I captured the most complete video capture of the World Trade Center attacks when I lived up there. My wife and I lived up there. And it's like, there's nothing that even comes close to the capture that I have, I lived there and I captured the attacks. And I know that I was surveilled and there was a background check that was done on me when I released that, because I waited 10 years to release it. And the NSA, I'm sure they did a background check. I said, look, I said, but now, I said, I know that you can go ahead and do a background, you can go ahead and open my military records up. And I said, and I told them, I testified to what was done to me when I was in the military. I said, can you help me to get a fair and just result with that? As a just, what? An act of decency. I said, please, all things considered, would you do this for me? They won't even answer me back on that. I've been made to wait going on 8 years since the VA told me that I needed hip replacement surgery. I'm to the point where I can hardly do anything, man. I can't even get an antibiotic for a bodily infection from a tooth because I don't have a 100% VA disability rating. Every veteran out there that's got a disability from their service, they can't even get an antibiotic by the policy that's in place. They can't have any dental work done at all, anything related to their teeth, unless they have a 100% VA rating. So I've asked for help, with that, and nobody will even get back to me. The details of what was done to me while I was in service to our nation. I served honorably with distinction. I served. My service, another thing that happened is that I was injured while in the Air Force, and the injuries resulted in my having to have 2 spinal fusions. But that isn't even the issue that I was talking about to review from my records. Yeah. It has to do with something else. Something just really bad. And I said, can I have some consideration here, some decency? Can you muster some integrity, something that looks like honor, and help me? Wouldn't you think so? Governor DeWine, I mentioned, he activated our Army National Guard to keep people from being able to capture on photo or video the preparations that they made for the massive burn off of everything that was left on the site, because they had to go in there and put fires out that they said they could get nowhere near. And then they pumped out that highly flammable carcinogenic industrial chemical into the troughs, what they dug out with the heavy equipment. They pumped it out into those. There were 2 different areas that I know of that they did that, and then they lit it up, but they had to keep everybody out of there from videotaping it. Looks pretty bad, right? But they used our guardsmen to commit a crime against their own citizenry. And I thought about it. You think about a lot of things, and one thing was, at that time there were so many contracts in place to supply Ukraine. At that time, we're talking about February of 2023. Could be at those trains why they didn't pump the shit out into containers on either side of the tracks. They could have taken that to, we have special incinerators to deal with hazardous materials that nullify those properties. Special filtration systems, with these, special facilities we have. We have one in Ohio. I don't know how many of them we have here in the United States, but they could have taken all of that shit involved in the derailment and handled it properly. But they determined to get up and running as fast as possible to save time and money. So they just illegally burned it off. Yeah, they read that note that I had sent again. I sent that note, and they read that note. Oh, this guy says he thinks that these containers can explode like that. So they made up a story. This is what Governor DeWine, how he based his state of emergency and activated the Army National Guard on 2 hours after I sent out that footage of them intentionally burning off containers. They said that there was one container, folks, that needed pressure let off of it because they said it was going to explode. They said it would send out shrapnel out a mile. They said all that dangerous smoke. But they must have read my note, of course, and they read it and they're like, you know what? If this dummy believes it, probably everybody will. And they called it a controlled release. It was all about letting pressure off of one container, that lie that they went in there and did the preparations. They, you know, what I just said, they put out all of the fires that they said they could get nowhere near to then pump the stuff out. Imagine the whole area would have to be safe. It would have to be safe, cool even. How fast they were able to do that, you know, efficiently. And then pump out that highly flammable chemical into those troughs, those trenches that they had dug out with, by, you know, they used heavy equipment they moved in there to do it with. This all happened. This was all done. And our authorities worked with those criminal corporations, multi-billion-dollar corporations. The worst aspect of it is, of course, that they intentionally left thousands of Pennsylvanians oblivious and never gave them a chance to even, hell, people could, if they would have said, that told people the truth about how dangerous it was, people could have evacuated. But then they would have owned it. They would have owned it, and they would have been held accountable for what was a multi-billion-dollar disaster, folks.